Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our podcast, Workforce Rewired. We are having conversations around humans and technology at work. And today I'm very excited to be joined by our special guest, Marshall Cherry. Marshall is the president and CEO of Roanoke Cooperative and also a member of the Catapult board. So, Marshall, welcome. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Very honored to be a part of this as well today.
Thanks, Marshall. It's always fun talking with you. You have such great insights. Excited to see where this conversation goes today. Our topic is talking around governance models that don't slow down innovation. And when we think about the balance that CEOs have of strategic vision and where you're taking your organization from an innovative perspective to remain competitive, as I see your visual Connect 2030 there in the background. You've got your eye on 2030, but you also have to build a governance model within your organization that, mitigates risk and drives processes and everything else. So, what does modern governance look like to you in kind of a fast moving pace as you're headed towards 2030?
Yeah, that's a great question and very great opening question as well, Cheryl. Yes, to me, modern governance really to me is all about clarity. The board, right? You're going to have your board of directors. They're going to set the direction and, of course, define what the risk tolerance looks like for the organization and establish the guardrails. But it's really the management team, the team members in general, who are to execute within those boundaries. And even for us locally here at Roanoke, one of the things, I guess, an example of that is we made a very significant investment in fiber over the past several years. And it was a very high risk, high reward decision, right? But what allowed us to move forward was less governance, but it was really more clear governance that was directed to us from the board. And so we're aligned with the board on specific metrics that mattered, and that gave the management team the ability to execute within that discipline.
That's a fantastic example. And, we talk about the need to set a chart and then clearly communicate down to the team, what does this mean for us? And at Catapult, we talk about that in the why that's out there and then the how. And the why is often the wow factor, right? That's the innovation piece, is the wow. But then you got people who are behind the scenes and they're like, I got to do this how, and I need to make this happen. What have you found that's been successful in providing some of that clarity to bridge between the wow of innovation and how you execute?
All right, that was a different question there, sure. So I'll just say to answer that, really, it's really all about listening at the end of the day. Your team members, certainly they're the ones who are going to carry it forward on a daily basis. I have not always been the CEO, but certainly I've been very supportive over the years of my leadership, who has basically led organizations where I was a part of. And to me, the A and the Z, that's not really hard to identify. I mean, you know the state of affairs, you know what it takes to get started, you know what the end game looks like if we're going to begin with the end in mind. But the area around the from B to Y is very important, and that's where you really get down at a level with your team members to help them understand their connection back to the work. Some things here that we're doing even now at Roanoke, as we have established a new corporate strategy, as you can see in my background here, is making sure that we're identifying team members who will help support the strategy by speaking to the strategy. And we're trying to find different channels, whereas we can call on those team members to actually communicate different things. Two things, really, two questions. One is, what is it? What does Connect 2030 mean when you see us talk about it? Because yes, as a CEO, I'm going to talk about it all the time. My leadership team, they're going to talk about it all the time. Board, we'll talk about it all the time. So we need people to understand that. But then the second question is what are you currently working on that actually contributes or aligns with it? Because one of the key things that comes out of strategy overall, and when you're talking about applying a culture, is alignment. And if we can make sure that people can understand where they align, I think you have built an employee that will stay with you throughout the long term because they understand the work.
Yeah, I think that's a great example about employee empowerment. And, when you set a vision like this, you have lots of layers of decision making and approval and things like that that go into it. Have you found a secret to decisions that should require approval and those that shouldn't, and where employees are empowered, to make decisions, and how you identify where those are?
Yeah, for me, I think if there's something that's like frequent, sensitive, or tactical, then to me, it really shouldn't require multiple layers because there's the redundancy that comes with that. But there are some things, and when I think about it, when we talk about the let's just say the lanes between management and the board, and these are just examples, pricing adjustments, promotions, or operational execution, certainly that needs to sit with management. But as the board of directors, their role is to set the guardrails, and I try to do the same even as a CEO because I don't need to be in every decision, or else I'm not going to be able to do my job. So we want to empower leaders to be able to make decisions, and again, if there are things that are just very frequent on their end and it's time sensitive, and it's the tactical day-to-day grind, I want to call on them to be able to make that decision. And if there's no high risk coming with it, then certainly it's not one that I think needs to come to me.
Yeah, and I think you have a really great perspective. You mentioned you hadn't always been the CEO. You were the COO for a while, and you've been in the organization, and now you're working with boards. So you've seen the full continuum of governance and risk, and what roles. Do you have any insights? For you said the board is strategy, the management team is empowering people, and then the other folks, as long as there aren't decisions around, would you say, price and something else that lead us to that. Is that working well for you? Do you think there's insights for other organizations, people who haven't had the benefit of being in all those different seats?
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Yes, absolutely. And as an organization, yes, we're very metric centered. A lot of that comes from our history, and I'll just say personal to me, my history in the organization. As you mentioned, before becoming the CEO, I actually served as the chief operating officer for about 8 years, and I've been the CEO now for about 4.5 years. And as the COO, I actually led the Office of Strategy Management. That was, one of my duties. And so we're talking about 10 to 12 years. And in doing so, I feel that we've really matured in how we manage strategy and performance because culture is a key component as well. Metrics aren't just something that leadership is looking at, they're visible across the
Mhm.
organization. And that's a key part as well is the whole communication around strategy. One of the things I've learned over time is the importance of being able to say it often, but also be wide in the ways that you say it. So there's this 7x7 model, say it 7 times, 7 different ways, which naturally raises accountability through that communication. And for us, when we think about the board of directors, one of the things that we have really gotten honed in on, obviously, we're always going to pay attention to the operating statement, right? But there are certain components that we're paying attention to because there's this one leading measure that stands out to us, and it really speaks to our ability to cover our financial obligations. And as we're able to do that, then everything else should follow. The amount of equity we're trying to raise for the membership, and as well as the amount that we can return in terms of equity back to them. So those are things that we're watching very closely as well between the board, myself, our finance team, and so we've been able to just apply discipline around that metric. But again, at the end of the day, it really, again, becomes about around communication and clarity. It allows the board to stay focused, on oversight and risk, while giving the management team the flexibility that it needs to execute within those guardrails. But we've learned a lot over the years. That strategy isn't about doing everything at once. And you know that it's very easy to get caught in that. And I think it's just a matter of knowing that it is a marathon. And again, for us, you see the year, right? 2030 behind me. This is April 2026. So we have time, but we want to be consistent in how much we say it and keeping folks focused on the North Star that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And you know the popular saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you've talked about both kind of the balance of strategy and then culture, which is very important to you there at Roanoke Cooperative. Are there warning signs that you've seen where governance is starting to go off the rails and it's becoming, less about the value proposition and less about value?
Yeah. Say that question one more time.
Mhm. So, Marshall, you know the saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," and you've talked a lot about strategy there and connecting it to the culture at Roanoke Cooperative. Have you seen warning signs, maybe that governance is becoming less about the strategy and the value proposition and more about control?
Yeah, absolutely. So, governance has really gone too far when decisions take too long, when the same topics keep coming back for approval, or when leadership becomes hesitant to act. And I'll be honest, that's a pet peeve of mine. When I feel that if we've covered something and I was clear and it comes back to me again, let's just say months later, then I feel that, governance has really gone too far and we have to bring some level of clarity. And so one of the biggest warning signs for me is when even your executive leaders don't feel empowered, to make decisions. And when that happens, governance has shifted from enabling the organization to controlling it. And so as the CEO, I try to model culture where leaders are empowered to make decisions. And that doesn't mean every decision, right, will align with how I would approach it. But I feel that that's healthy overall. Where I step in is when the level of risk changes. And that becomes an opportunity for alignment and discussion. And so not to take the decision making away, but to make sure we're moving in the right direction together. And so to me, it just sets balance, and it's all about balance. And leadership feel ownership, but also know when to pull others in as the stakes continue to increase and they're higher. So when everything requires escalation, governance isn't adding value anymore. It's creating a drag to me.
Yeah. What a great point. And, your earlier point that you made, the 7x7 communication, right? You know that there's not clarity if your executive team can't get on board. Do you have any strategies for how leaders balance kind of that oversight and compliance and risk without stifling creativity? Given us some great examples, Marshall, of empowering the executive team, making sure they're on board, so that you've got the appropriate mix of balance of oversight and compliance and risk. Um, how do you continue to keep creativity moving at Roanoke Cooperative? How do you imbalance that?
To me, it's all about really just asking for it. And I try to model a behavior, particularly with my team, whereas I want a culture of curiosity here at the cooperative. I feel that when an employee is engaged, they're going to be ones that will stop you perhaps in the hallway and ask the question, how does this affect us? I just read this in the news. How does this affect us over the long term? I also was in a conversation with someone in the grocery store about an opportunity or something that's happening in our communities. How does this affect us? To me, that brings, when that level of curiosity is stimulating from an employee, it brings the creativity because now we can think through it together because you have forced me to think long
Mhm.
term and you're forcing me to think about opportunities and threats, almost like a little SWOT analysis that we're able to do right there in the hallway. I feel that when an employee will ask that level of question versus the one that always talks about what's in it for me, because we're
Mhm.
going to take care of the employee. And I think if we're successful in our strategy, employees will be taken care of anyway. But when employees will ask those levels of questions, that brings the level of creativity that we're desiring. And I typically will just ask. And I do here, what I normally will do here at Roanoke is on a regular basis, I'll have a cross-functional team of our employees. There's a morning breakfast. I like to call it Morning with Marshall. I guess to play on the M's, right? First letter, my first name. But nevertheless, there's an opportunity over breakfast to talk to cross-functional team members, engage their perspective, and ask them how things are going, and also seek their input so that we're all successful. And I think in that as well, what it does is it shows that I am accessible as their leader, and I'm listening to them as well. And so I'm very intentional on things like that.
That's awesome. And I loved what you said, tying creativity to curiosity. I think that's one of a lost skill that we're watching kind of diminish in today's day and age with so much technology out there. And you know, uh, I'll date myself and say, when I was in school, our job was to go find information, right? We all went to the libraries, we had to sift through volumes of books and find the information. And today's generation isn't about finding the information, they're inundated with information overload. Their job is to decipher what information is relevant and real and helpful, and that takes a certain level of curiosity, right,
Yeah.
to get there. So I love the fact that you tied curiosity to creativity.
And Cheryl, I think that even with all of the information that's available to them now, it really sets them up on a path where they can feel probably stronger than we were during our time around going to get the information. Yes, it's there, but at the end of the day, it's still the individual who has to generate the prompt, right? And ask the question and decipher what's how this fits me and what I want to achieve. And so the good thing I would say in all of the tech and information that's available now, it makes it, yeah, it can be overwhelming, but at the same time, you have it. And when an individual has it, then it's up to them. And we as people, we know what our tendencies are, where we're leaning toward, and how do we use all of this information that's available to us to decipher what's right from at my level of alignment to be successful.
Well, and I think you just summed up really perfectly kind of our conversation around tech enabled and people centered, with putting governance at the center of that. Having those models and the frameworks that support innovation, and leaders like yourself, sitting in the CEO seat, who bring people along in their organizations, with the proper amount of communication and direction. You're modeling the way, Marshall. And so thank you for that. Is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with that I didn't ask you?
Yes, I just like to leave everyone with governance. It has to evolve with the organization. And for us here at Roanoke, we're not just maintaining an electric system. We're effectively building a community around connectivity now, which is why this level of strategy is so important in the work that we're doing. But we're definitely keeping our fingers on the pulse and making sure that we're very methodical in our approach along the way, and looking forward to seeing some success coming on the back end of this work. So keep driving forward.
Awesome. What a great speaker you've been, talking about governance models that don't slow down innovation, and some really great examples. Marshall, thank you for being our guest today on Workforce Rewired, sponsored by Catapult Employers Association. Tune in
Thank
next week, and we'll have more conversations around people-centered and tech-enabled organizations. Thank you, Marshall.
thank you, Cheryl. Take care.